Record. And before we jump back in, just a couple things. First off, in our online learning system, I did put in our contract with the highlights. So we looked at it last night without the highlights, but I think it's more helpful for you guys if you can see it with the highlights when you're reviewing it. And when you go through this, you're going to see that there's a lot of things highlighted. So I don't want you guys to get so bogged down on reading this thing word for word yet, right? Just focus on the main ideas, the main topics. And remember your textbook. What do we say? Pages 287 to 293. So those provisions in your book, and they go over things like due diligence, settlement versus closing, that kind of thing. And I would call those what's in your book the more important terms to focus on. The contract with the highlights is in the online learning system, but it's down here in our Campbell folder. So don't look for it in the unit 10. We're going to find that in our Campbell folder. Everybody good with that? Okay. And remember, we recorded too, so you can go back through that conversation at your own pace. Are you guys, I know some of you are watching the recording or at least clicking on it because I get a count, but I don't see who. But are you guys, and are the recordings, is the YouTube channel helpful? Is that something that, because you can do, if you miss time, obviously, but if you need to hear it again, I mean, I've had students that listen to it in their car. I know sometimes we listen to it at work if your boss will let you have, you know, earbuds in. So it's about that exposure and hearing it over and over again. You know, when the pandemic hit, nobody was really happy. But I do have to admit, one thing that the biggest benefit for me in my pre-licensing class when we all moved online was the ability to record. So definitely a perk, definitely a plus. And if and when I go back in person, I need to figure out how to record in person. So I guess I got to get some equipment, but definitely a benefit there. So I do hope you're taking advantage of it because it's there. Hello, it's there to help. The other thing I want to do before we get started, I want to just do a quick review. I'm going to pull up my whiteboard here. And now knowing what we know, let's go back and have another conversation about this contract formation. So when we talk about contract formation, what we're talking about is this magic moment in time when it goes from being an offer to a contract. And you guys, if you haven't seen it yet, you're going to see a test question that's like this long, and you're going to look at it and go, oh my gosh, I don't know how to get through this. I think the best way to get through those questions is to make it into a visual. And it starts with the contract communication wall. Okay. So on one side of the communication wall, we're going to have the agent, we're going to have the buyer. And in this case, the buyer is going to start as the offeror. On the other side of the wall, we're going to have an agent, we're going to have the seller, and then we're going to have the seller start as the offeree. So you can kind of set yourself up. Again, please don't get it stuck in your head that the buyer's the offeror, the seller's the offeree. Yes, this is the way that it happens the majority of the time. I'd rather you guys, when you see offeror, see the giver of the offer. When you see offeree, see the receivee of the offer. Don't get bogged down in buyer and seller. So let's walk through this. Let's make sure we're good here. Agent and buyer are out looking at properties this weekend. Buyer finds one that they like and they say they want to write it up. Agent says, great. Get your hands on your forms. May they be on your laptop or wherever you have them. And we're going to assist the buyer. We're going to fill the blanks in on behalf of the buyer. That doesn't mean I'm going to tell the buyer what to offer. I'm not going to tell the buyer the due diligence and the earnest money. I'm going to assist them. I'm going to have a conversation with them about what they're comfortable asking. Remember, we're going to pull a CMA, look at our comps, so we can kind of give them an educated opinion. And once we have with our buyer filled in the blanks on the sales contract, we're going to have our buyer sign it. And then the buyer's agent is going to communicate with the listing agent and say, I'm sending you my buyer's offer. We're going to present the offer when we contact either the listing agent or the seller. So the listing agent says, thank you for your offer. Please and thank you still go a long way. So the listing agent's going to say, thank you for their offer. They're going to call their seller and they're going to say, we have an offer on the table. And the listing agent's going to have a discussion and review the terms of the offer with the seller. Because in this case, the seller is the offeree, what are the seller's three choices when their agent discusses it with them? Everybody ready? Let's do this. The seller can accept it, reject it, or counter it. Did y'all dream about that last night? So the offeree has three choices: accept it, reject it, or counter it. If they accept it, they're agreeing to all the terms exactly how they are. If they reject it, it's dead on the table. If they counter it, a counter offer is a rejection. It's a rejection with a but. So in the event of a counter offer, let's say in this case, the seller says, I'm good with all the terms except for the purchase price, the due diligence fee, and the earnest money deposit. That doesn't mean leave us much left, does it? So in other words, the seller is good with the dates. The seller is good with any, if the buyer asks for closing costs or home warranty, right? Like all the other terms, the seller is good with everything else, but they are countering the terms of the purchase price, the due diligence fee, and the earnest money deposit. With that counter offer, the roles reversed. Remember, a counter offer is a rejection. The buyer's offer to the seller is dead on the table. And guys, once it's dead on the table, there's no going back. You cannot go back and revive it. So now the seller is making a brand new offer to the buyer. The seller becomes the offeror, the buyer becomes the offeree. Everybody good so far? Yeah. So the seller states the term of their counters. They call their agent and say, yep, this is what I want to counter. Listing agent calls buyer's agent and says, thank you for your offer. We have a counter. Buyer's agent says, thank you for your counter. We'll get back to you. Buyer's agent calls buyer and says, we have a counter. Because we've countered and the roles reversed, what are the buyer's three choices? Is the offeree. The buyer can accept it, reject it, or counter it. Let's say in this case, the buyer accepts it. Remember, for your test, for our purposes here in pre-licensing world, when you see that the offeree has accepted, we know that it means that it's been what? If they've accepted, it's been signed, okay? You guys do not need to worry yet about, but is it verbal? Is it, don't worry about that yet. I'm telling you, in pre-licensing world, when we see that it's been accepted, we know that it's been signed. In the real world, you need to verify it, but we're not in the real world yet, okay? So we see that it's accepted. The buyer has accepted, means they have signed. The buyer calls their agent and says, I've signed, I've accepted all the terms. Shake your head, yes or no. Are we under contract? The buyer calls their agent. Am I under contract? Good, not yet. I got one of my two steps, right? I got the last offeree's signature. Buyer calls their agent and says, we're good. Buyer's agent calls the listing agent and says, my guys have accepted. Now, what do you think? Are we under contract? Congratulations, buyer and seller. You are under contract because communication of acceptance has crossed the line. We have acceptance, and then we have communication of acceptance. It doesn't matter that the seller is not in the loop on this yet, because when it comes to contract formation, communicating with me is the same thing as communicating. In this case, if I were the listing agent, once I receive that phone call or that text or whatever form of communication from the buyer's agent, let me know that they've accepted. Congratulations, we're under contract. Now we can do our little mini celebration, our contract dance, if you will. Obviously, the very next thing that the listing agent is going to want to do is what? Who's still in the dark? The seller. So the listing agent is going to want to make sure that they contact their seller. I got a question in about what it looks like with dual agency. Bear with me. We're actually going to look at some different images. If we don't get to it tonight, we'll see it tomorrow. We'll talk about some different relationships. The example that we've been talking about and the example that I'm almost certain you're going to see on your test is the presumption that we got two different agents with two different firms. The contract communication wall does get a little murky when we get into like dual agency and seller sub-agency, and we will look at that. But I would like you guys, and you may see some practice questions if you haven't already about sub-agency. And yes, that contract communication wall does get murky. So we will talk about that again. If we don't get to it tonight, we'll see it whenever we meet again, Tuesday. Any questions on this contract formation? Again, I highly recommend you guys draw it out, see it. It's way too easy to ask you about the buyer and the seller on your test. I feel more likely you're going to see about the offeror and the offeree. So you need to know all those counter offers, all those times those roles reverse. You need to know who the last offeror is and who the last offeree is. Okay. So where we are, we left last night after we talked about our offer to purchase and contract. Like I said, I got the highlights in the online learning system for you. Yes, there is a lot of highlighted. No, I don't think you guys should have to read the whole thing. Again, we're just trying to get the big picture and some of the finer points. Those finer points are the ones in your book. What have I been saying? 287 and 293. So on page 293, after we're talked about our sales contract, next up, we need to talk about some commonly used addenda. Remember, when we see the word addenda, we need to see the word add. An addenda adds to and becomes part of the offer to purchase and contract. We present it with our offer, and upon acceptance, it becomes part of the contract. So not only did the North Carolina Association of Realtors, who's NCAR, and the North Carolina Bar Association, who are our attorneys, not only did they jointly come together and create the agency agreements that we use, the sales contract that we use, but they also came together and provided us with these commonly used addenda. Most transactions require some sort of addenda. It's really rare to not have an addenda. And what we're going to do is look at some of the more commonly used addenda, not covering all of them by any means. And guys, there's no way for the North Carolina Association of Realtors and the North Carolina Bar Association to predict every possible negotiable term, every possible thing that the buyer and the seller can agree to. So if we run into a situation where we don't have a form that fits our situation, I don't have a form that fits, I don't have an applicable form available to me, what are we going to do? We're going to draft it ourselves? That just seems like the easiest thing to do. No, we're not going to draft it ourselves. What are we going to do? We're going to call our attorney. So if we come into a situation where a form doesn't fit, we're not going to wing it and figure it out. I cannot draft. Sometimes there's some conflict between addenda and the contract. In that case, the addenda is going to control. The addenda, the applicable addenda, will override whatever provision in the contract. So if there's ever a conflict, the addenda will prevail. So let's look at some of our addenda, starting on page 293. One addenda we have is the FHA VA financing addendum. And we're going to use this when your buyer, as a buyer's agent, when your buyer is getting an FHA or a VA loan. Now, we'll talk about FHA and VA loans, conventional, USDA, the different loan types next week. The big thing that the FHA VA addenda does is it protects the buyer's earnest money. If we find out after due diligence that the home doesn't appraise for the purchase price, the FHA VA addenda says, even though we're after due diligence, the buyer chooses to terminate, they're going to get their earnest money back. So as a buyer's agent, we absolutely want to make sure that we include this to protect our buyer's earnest money. And then if it's a VA, there are some things that we will learn about next week. There are some inspections that the VA lender will require the buyer to get. For example, a pest inspection is required. If it's on a well or a septic, the VA will require those inspections. But here's the kicker. The VA requires the buyer to get it. The VA does not allow the buyer to pay for it. So the VA addenda addresses this, and it lets the seller know there may be required inspections. The buyer's not required to pay for it. So who's left in the transaction to pay for it? The seller. Isn't that important for the seller to take into consideration when they're considering this offer? You may be on the hook for the pest inspection. You may be on the hook for the well test and septic test. So that's what that addenda is doing, specifically that portion with the VA, is letting the seller know if you accept this offer, you may be on the hook to pay for certain expenses. Shake your head, yes or no. Does the seller have to accept that offer? Do they have to accept a VA or an FHA? No, because when they get their offer, what are their three choices? They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. So the FHA VA financing addendum. Again, we will talk more about that next week. Other addenda that we may see, we briefly touched on these last night. We could have a situation with a buyer possession before closing. So I got an addendum for that. We could also have a seller possession after closing. So let's make sure we understand what both of these are saying. Buyer possession before closing means that the buyer's moving in before the deed changes hands. Seller possession after closing means the seller is staying after the deed changes hands. So if we run into either one of these situations, we have a form for that. We have an addenda. And while both of these say pretty much the same thing, it depends on whether you're talking about buyer possession or seller possession after. Basically, what we're saying in both of these situations is that one party is acting as the landlord, one party is the homeowner, and the other party is acting as the tenant. Both of these forms allow us to negotiate rent. By the way, these are for short-term situations. I would say a week or two. They're not a full-blown lease. They do not cover the details of a full-blown lease. So anything short-term, which I know could be subjective, but that's what the form says. The tenant is going to owe rent for the time that they're living there. The tenant's going to be the one responsible for expenses, utilities, repairs. Both parties are going to have insurance. Whomever's acting as the landlord needs homeowners insurance. Whomever's acting as the tenant is going to need renter's insurance. And that's what a big part of this form addresses, is making sure that everybody is properly insured. Another commonly used addenda we may see is our lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum. We talked about this in Unit 20. Why don't you guys tell me in a private chat? Let's make sure we're all here and awake. This is required on all residential built properties built prior to what year? Lead-based paint is required to anything built prior to what year? Come on, Julie, ask them something hard tonight. Goodness. All right, we got that. Oh, I will, don't worry. All right, so anything built prior to 1978 requires the lead-based paint hazard addendum. Guys, I'm not telling you. Your home was built prior to 1978. It has lead. I'm telling you, because your home was built prior to 1978, it may contain lead. And it's about educating the buyer or the tenant about the risks, the dangers of lead in the home. Another commonly used addenda, and quite frankly, the most commonly used addenda, in my opinion, the one that I see the most often is called the additional provisions addendum. These are provisions that are popular, but they're just not quite popular enough to make it into the offer to purchase and contract. We see these quite frequently, but they just haven't made it to the sales contract yet. And the additional provisions addendum covers several additional provisions. One thing that the offeror may choose to do is put an expiration on their offer. You can put an expiration date on your offer and say this offer is good until 5 p.m. on February 4th, for example. If you're going to put an expiration date on your offer, we could use the additional provisions addendum to indicate that date. And what that says is if we don't have acceptance by this date, the offer is dead. The offer is terminated. Remember what we said though, you guys. The offeror is always free to revoke their offer at any time, even if they put an expiration date on it. So if we put an expiration date, what I just said, February something at 5 p.m., and you wake up tomorrow and decide you don't want this house, the offeror can revoke their offer, even though we have an expiration date. If it's vacant land, for example, or if the septic tank needs some modifications, the additional provisions addendum gives us a provision on the septic tank installation modification. Is the buyer going to have the soil tested for suitability, see where and if we can install a septic tank, an on-site septic tank? Is there any modifications or anything that needs to be done? So there's an on-site septic tank. We may be using the additional provisions addendum. If the property is currently being rented, if there's an existing tenant and lease on the property, then we have a provision for rental income or investment properties. The seller will want to turn over the information about the tenant, about the lease. The buyer's going to buy honoring the existing lease. So they have a right during their due diligence to review that information, to review the lease, review the standing of the tenant, make sure they're not delinquent or anything, to know what they're getting themselves into when they purchase. So if it's a rental or an income investment property, additional provisions addendum. By the way, we're going to talk all about the landlord and the tenant when we get to Unit 11. There's also a place for agreed upon repairs and or improvements. Well, let's think about what we're doing here. I'm just now presenting the offer. We're not even under contract, but I have a buyer that says something like, I refuse to buy this house if that's not fixed. When your buyer says something like, do you have a material fact on your hand now? Something that's important to the buyer. And if this isn't fixed, I'm not buying the house. So how do we communicate that? How do we address that with the seller? We use our additional provisions addendum. We present this repair or improvement to the seller to consider when they're considering the terms of the offer. And if they accept that agreed upon repairs and or improvements, then the seller is agreeing to do those repairs at some point during the contract closing process. Understand this. If we agree to any repairs at contract formation, we go under contract. This does not negate the buyer's ability to have a home inspection, to have a pest inspection, to continue on and do further inspections and investigations. These are things that we can see with the naked eye. Let's say, for example, there's a sliding glass door, and your buyer notices that there's a chip in the sliding glass door, and that chip is starting to spider. Maybe it was hit, maybe it was thrown, a rock thrown by the lawnmower or something, right? It started small. It's kind of like a car windshield, right? It starts small, and then one day it just gets this big. I don't need a home inspector to come in here and tell me that that window is chipped, that that window needs replaced. Do you? Can't you look at that and say, wow, we can replace that? And if that's a deal breaker to your buyer, if your buyer says, I'm not going to buy this with that, then we want to make sure we're presenting all that up front. So if if the seller agrees, they've already agreed to do repairs. Now your buyer does their inspections and investigations. Once the contract's formed, they can always ask for more repairs. Always remember, the seller is never under any obligation to repair. If the property has a mobile or manufactured home on the property, we need to address that. We're going to look for the VIN number, identify if it's personal property or real property. Is it going to convey? And then the last one, and the newest one added to this form, if you're going under contract today in February and there's an outside pool or spa, it's probably been winterized, which means you can't have it inspected as is. So the buyer may choose to have it unwinterized so they can have it inspected so they know what they're buying. And that provision covers who's going to pay for that, for example, who's going to pay to have it unwinterized and then re-winterized. Now, obviously, if you're going under contract in August, the pool should be up and running, right? But this is to cover us when we're in the middle of winter. Nobody is swimming yet. We're just thinking about it. Again, of the addenda, the commonly used addenda, I think this is one of the more commonly used. And of these, I think the ones that we use the most are the expiration of offer and agreed upon repairs. I had buyers once, they were a young couple, they didn't have kids, it was just the two of them. And we went and looked at a property and we walked out back, and out back was a nice playground set. I mean, like nice, like all three of us wanted to go play, right? I mean, it looked like a lot of fun. And my buyer said, as great as that is, it's not going to do us any good. That's where we're going to put our vegetable garden. Can we ask the seller to remove that? I used the agreed upon repairs and or improvements, requested the seller remove that playground set. They agreed. And now they're contractually obligated between now and closing to take that down. Questions on this one? Comments? Another addenda we may see is called the Owners Association Disclosure Addendum. This is disclosing the information about the Owners Association. You guys remember when we looked at the RPOs, the Residential Property and Owner Association Disclosure Statement back in Unit 8? And the RPOs was the mandatory form with optional disclosure, where the seller can say yes, no, or no representation. Part of the RPOs, the last page and a half, included information about the Owners Association. In the event that the RPOs is exempt, but there's an Owners Association, we still need, or the seller will still need to disclose that information And that's where this form comes in. We're not going to use the RPOs. The biggest reason why the RPOs is exempt is because it's new construction. Or as they specifically say, never before lived in dwelling. So when a buyer's buying that, we don't have to do the RPOs disclosed by property. Nobody's lived there yet. However, they do deserve disclosure about the owners association. We have a vacation rental addendum. Do I have anybody that is currently living at the beach? Do I have anybody that's currently living in the mountains? You, okay, good. A couple of you. Anybody moving to the beach at some point in your future? Yeah, that's the dream, right? Or moving to the mountains at some point in your future? Okay. This one, yeah, guys, don't get me wrong. Winston-Salem is lovely, but let's face it, people are not vacationing here. So where we're going to see this for more likely is going to be, you know, lakes, beach, mountain. And when you get to the beach, when you get to live there and you're still doing real estate, you're probably going to deal with the vacation rental addendum, and you're going to have to get more familiar with the Vacation Rental Act. We're going to briefly mention this. I don't remember what unit, but I got like 2 things to say about the Vacation Rental Act and pre-licensing. If you're moving to an area that deals with vacation properties and you're going to use this form, you're going to have to get more training from your firm. Vacation properties are handled just a little bit differently. So again, whenever we get to it, we'll talk about the 2 things that we need to know right now. Aren't you glad we don't have to look at all these forms? Basic idea of what they do. Another one that we have, and again, we're going to talk more about the short sale when we get to financing, but another form addenda that we have is a short sale addendum. A property may qualify for a short sale if the owner is underwater. And what I mean by that, the owner owes more than what the property is worth. They can't sell the home and pay off all their debt. In order to qualify for a short sale, the owner needs to be underwater. And the key to the short sale is that all lien holders have to agree to release the lien at an amount less than what they're owed. So if the lien holders agree to do this, then we can do a short sale. Again, we will talk more about this in financing. We may even look briefly at this form when we get to financing, because I think this form does a good job of breaking down what these things are and what they're about. Short sale addenda gives parties an out if they want to take an out, while the lender or the lien holders are deciding if they're willing to. By the way, the term short sale has absolutely nothing to do with the length of time that these things take. Anybody ever dealt with a short sale? They say on average, from contract to close, on average, you could be looking at about 6 months. And that's average, which means it could be more, it could be less. So short sales, we all need to be aware of what's going on if we get one into it. Talking more about that. And one thing, these short sale addendum, another thing it does is it creates a contingency. And basically what that contingency says is, if I can't get lien holder approval, then I can't sell my house. What's me selling my house contingent on? Me getting approval. And that's what the short sale addendas do. We saw a lot of these. I don't know if you guys were around in the late 08, 09, 2010. If you guys were following the real estate market then, we suffered something, what was that, 12, 13 years ago? Something called the housing market crash. It was as severe and as crazy as it sounds. We were dealing with a lot of short sales, a lot of foreclosures during that time. We'll talk more about the housing market crash, a little history lesson on that. We're not seeing as many short sales and foreclosures right now. But you know what? If I were to whip out my crystal ball, I have a feeling these are coming back, because the last couple of years, buyers paid more than what the home was worth. Buyers were offering, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars over asking price. And when you start off underwater, it's hard to maintain. So I fear a consequence of the market that we're coming out of is we're going to see more of these again. Hopefully not like what we saw in the housing market crash. But they were a very real thing. And I think to some extent they're coming back. So again, we'll see that more in units 14 and 15. If time allows, we very well may look at this form, but at that time, then I'll also make sure you guys know where it is, because like I said, it does do a good job of explaining it. The last addenda we're talking about for now is called the backup contract addendum. This is the form that we're going to use when a buyer wants to make an offer on a property that's already under contract. Did you hear what I just said? The seller's under contract. They're contractually obligated to sell their home to a buyer. And then another buyer comes along and makes an offer. The seller can accept that offer as a backup contract, thus putting that backup buyer in a secondary position. And it's funny to think about this, but that backup buyer is standing off in the wings with their fingers crossed, hoping that the primary buyer terminates. Because if the primary buyer terminates for any reason, this backup contract addendum puts the backup buyer into the primary position. We don't have to go back on the market. We don't have to allow showings. We don't have to go through the offer craziness again. If the primary terminates for any reason, the backup moves up. And so this form allows us, the parties agree to the terms like they always will. What's the purchase price, due diligence, earnest money? We negotiate all the terms, and upon acceptance, this backup buyer is in that secondary position. If the primary closes, the backup buyer is not out anything. The backup buyer doesn't owe or have to give anything until and if they become the primary. Now, they will put earnest money into an escrow account, but if they never make it to the primary, they'll get that earnest money back. So when I say they're not out anything, they do have to put money in, but if they never become the primary, they'll get that earnest money back. The other thing we need to understand about this form, this only allows me to have one backup buyer. So we have a primary buyer and a backup. I can't do a backup for the backup and a backup for the backup for the backup. We can't line them up. So the most we can have is a primary. If that primary terminates, that backup buyer moves into the primary position. Questions on that?
In a situation where you get an offer, you're on the market for 3 days, whatever, a short period of time. You're expecting to get, say the buyer makes an offer on a Friday and the house hasn't had a chance to even be really shown over a weekend yet. You get an offer that isn't horrible. You would accept it, but you're hoping for a better offer. Can an initial offer be accepted as a backup offer? No. Okay.
Yeah. No, if you're accepting that initial offer, and Tom, that's a great question, because please understand the seller doesn't have to accept anything, right? So if you have 5 showings tomorrow and you have an offer in your hand that isn't horrible, the seller may choose to wait to respond to that offer until after, see how the showings go tomorrow, right? But the seller doesn't have to wait for those showings tomorrow. The offeree see, I gotta think about it. The offeree is free to accept any offer they want at any time. So even if the offeree put a deadline on it, they said all offers due by 5 p.m. on Sunday. If the dream offer comes in, they're free to accept it. They don't have to wait until 5 p.m. on Sunday. But once they accept anything, that buyer's the primary. And we've seen new life being breathed into this form with this crazy multiple offer world that we're living in. Remember my situation where the team over the weekend got 45 offers? That means one offer got accepted and there were 44 rejections. That's crazy to think about. So the one offer that got accepted was the primary, and it could have been that one of those 44 rejections, I don't know if they did or not, but one of them could have done the backup just in case that primary decides for whatever reason not to proceed with the transaction. Some sellers like this because if their primary terminates, again, they don't have to go back on the market. They don't have to go through the showings. They don't have to go over this multiple offer fiasco again. Other sellers will say, no, if my primary terminates, let's see what I can get, right? Let's put them together and have these offers come back in and see what I get. So it's a conversation we're having with the seller. And remember, if a backup offer comes in, we're under contract and the backup offer comes in, what are your seller's 3 choices? They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. So do they have to accept the backup? No. Can they? Sure. Guys, as I mentioned last night, if you see a test question on these addenda, and you'll note these are all covered from 293 over to 295. If you see a test question on these addenda, we're not looking at these forms in class. You have them available in the forms link and Learn Test Pass if you want to go find them and check them out. I might suggest you spend your study time doing better things, but they're available to you if you want to look at them. If you see these addenda come up on a test question, it's going to give you a scenario and it's going to ask you which addenda is going to be most applicable. So we just need a very basic understanding, which is what we covered in 293 to 295. Just a basic understanding of what they do. You make it to post licensing, you're going through these things word for word. You get out in the real world and you have a situation to add an addenda, you need to be familiar with the form.
Will it use the name or the 2A1T?
The name, yeah, you don't have to know the numbers. I just put the numbers there for reference. Also, as I mentioned, these are not the only addenda that we talk about that we have access to. There's a cajillion out there. There's a form for practically everything. So there are other forms. If we agree to do any repair requests, I got a form for that. So the buyers had their inspections done during due diligence. They asked the seller to do repairs. And lo and behold, the seller says, yes, we have a repair request, a form that we can use, which would be an amendment because we're amending. Remember that one very important sentence in our contract that says this property is being sold in its current condition. So if the seller agrees to do one repair, if they agree to change a light bulb, we need to amend that sentence in the contract and do our repair request. There's some forms to help us with negotiations. For example, we have a form called Response to Buyer's Offer. Response to Buyer's Offer is pretty much a letter from the seller to the buyer responding to their offer. Yes, we can do it in email. Yes, we can do it in text. If you want to look official, if you want a form, we have a form for that. And then we also have termination forms if it doesn't go. We'll talk when we get to the escrow account, trust account, for example, if it terminates. We know that if it terminates within due diligence, the earnest money will go to the buyer. If it terminates after due diligence, the earnest money will go to the seller. That's what the contract tells us. If we terminate though, what happens to that earnest money isn't automatic. If we terminate, the parties have to agree to release it. So we have a couple different termination forms depending on the situation. Again, a lot more exposure to a lot more forms coming up. We're just dipping your big toe in pre-licensing. The forms I want you guys to focus on are the listing agreement, the buyer's agency agreement, which are both in the Unit 8 material in the online learning system, and the offer to purchase and contract, which is under our Campbell folder in the online learning system. Questions? Is that a question or an accidental unmute? Accident. Do we have a list of topics or forms to focus on? Yep. Page 293 to 295. So those are the forms that we just went over. Those are the only addenda that you need to be familiar with. Are these added into the offer? Or are they separate forms? They are separate forms that add to the offer. So yes and yes. Please remember when we're looking at addenda, I want you to see the word add. Addenda add to and become part of the offer to purchase and contract. Again, you guys, I'm trying to think if I've ever had a single transaction that didn't need some kind of addenda. And honestly, I'm coming up blank. Everything, most of them, let's say most of them are going to require something. Okay, questions, comments? Another good question, are they all contingencies? No, the short sale addendum does create a contingency, and it spells that out in that short sale addendum. It actually says this form creates a contingency. Remember, there are no built-in contingencies in our contract. But for example, that short sale addendum will add one. It will create one. Contingency says, I can't do this if I don't first do that. I can't complete this if this first doesn't happen. Some of the more common contingencies you may see say, I can't buy your house if I don't first sell mine. So what that contingency says is, if my house doesn't close, I'm not on the hook to buy yours. If I don't sell my house, I'm under no obligation to buy yours. So that short sale addendum says, if I can't get lien holder approval, then I can't sell. So what's me selling my home contingent on? Me getting that lien holder approval. Something has to happen before something else. Real estate is the industry of forms. My goodness, y'all know how many trees we used to kill before we got e-documents? Like seriously, we didn't care about the environment, apparently. And now that we have e-documents, we care a little bit more. But there's a lot of paperwork involved in real estate. Yes, it's a lot to keep up with. How many transactions do you have planned going on at one time? Every transaction has a different set of paperwork, different dates, due diligence, settlement, when is your home inspection scheduled? If you're not organized on a calendar, please get so. Please do so, because we got a lot to keep up with. At my height in my sales career, the busiest that I ever was in my entire life in sales, I had 9 things under contract. Some buyers, some sellers, but I had 9 things under contract. Y'all think about that. That's 9 due diligence dates. That's 9 settlement dates. That's 9 home inspections. That's 9 appraisals. That's a lot to keep up with. I came out of that fog, collected my commission checks, of course, but I came out of that fog and I was like, what in the world just happened? And it wasn't I mean, they didn't all go under contract at the same time. They didn't all close at the same time, right? Like they were all staggered. And that's why I say at my height, and I'm telling you, it was a lot to keep up with. If you're not organized, get organized. Sounds easy, right? Okay, let's go ahead and take a break. We come back, we're going to talk more about Unit 9. Alade, I'll address that when we get back. I'll answer that when we get back. Are we back? Okay. Cameras are on or are coming on. I see still coming back. Welcome back. So I am taking attendance. And the question that came in right before break, let me get the big flashing screen out of your way here. Question came in right before break. Are there realtors that can only have one client at a time? Remember, we're an independent contractor. For an independent contractor, who do we work for? We work for ourselves. So you pretty much conduct your business. You can be as busy as you want to be. If you want to do one at a time, if you want to do 20 at a time. I'm pretty sure everybody in this call has a different agenda. Some of you want to be top producers. Some of you may just want to dabble, right? So that's one good thing that allows us to do as an independent contractor. Firms vary. So you may see a firm that says, if you want to affiliate with me, you got to do X amount of production a year. You may have other firms that say, you're an independent contractor. You set your schedule, you determine your own client. So yeah, you want to do just one at a time? You want to do 20 at a time? I would get an assistant if you're going to do 20 at a time, because you're going to need help, if nothing else, with all the dang paperwork. But wouldn't that be a good problem to have when you're so busy in your real estate career that you need to hire an assistant? That's not a bad. We're actually going to talk about unlicensed employees. If we do get to hire an assistant, talk all about that. That's in that license law and commission rule. But you guys will read about that in the comments before we discuss that. And thank you, Cameron. Yep, we have taken attendance. So thank you for telling me you're back. I work for me. I set my own schedule. All right, let's move on from forms for a while. I don't want to guarantee like tonight, because as soon as I say that, there's when the form will pop up. But for the time being, let's move away from forms for just a minute. And let's talk about some contract procedures, some contract specifics. And first off, moving over to page 296, we need to talk about submitting offers to sellers. Please understand, this could be the listing agent communicating with the seller. This could be the buyer's agent communicating to the for sale by owner. If the FSBO, if your buyer's going after a FSBO, they don't have representation, and you will be communicating directly to the FSBO. So a couple rules, if you will. We have to deliver offers immediately, but in no event later than 3 days of our receipt. Blows my mind that this is a problem that keeps coming up. Y'all, when y'all get an offer, don't sit on it. Call your seller and tell them the good news. Commission rule specifically says that we have to deliver these offers immediately of our receipt, but in no event later than 3 days. If you're not going to be available for 3 days, let's say you're going on vacation. There's an old saying in this industry. It says, if you want to sell a house, go on vacation. Sure enough, every single time, about the time you're pulling your suitcase out the closet, your phone's going to start blowing up. I believe they call that Murphy's Law. You have two choices. You either take your laptop and you work with you on vacation, or you ask somebody to help you. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. But we need to make sure that things are covered while you're gone. Because even though you're gone, things still happen. Offers still come in. Buyers still want to buy. I think every single real estate agent should take a vacation, and it blows my mind how many don't. I think if the president of the United States of America can take a vacation, then we should be able to as well. So y'all didn't get so burnt out. What I'm trying to say is we always need to make sure if you're not going to be available, we want to make sure that we're covered. We have a duty to present. This isn't really fair, so I have to see your mouths move. We have a duty to present which offers to our sellers? Which one? Yeah, every single one of them. Low ball offer that's just going to make your seller mad, don't care, have to present it. An offer with a backup contract addendum, or an offer with a short sale contingency or short sale addendum, we have to present them all. And because I am just a broker, because I'm a special agent, I cannot accept or reject an offer on my seller's behalf. So if my seller wants to go out of town and they're going to be off the grid for a week, for example, and they say, we're going to be out of touch, you're not going to be able to get in contact with us. We either need to have them leave the authority to make decisions with somebody here, not me, but another family member or somebody here. We may need to consider taking their home temporarily off the market during that time. Negotiable, you have several options, but one thing that's not an option is accepting or rejecting an offer on their behalf while they're gone.
So, question, so if they go on vacation for a week and like an offer comes in while they're gone and you don't present it to them within 3 days, like what would happen?
Well, that's why we need to have this conversation before they go. Either you leave somebody else in control while you're gone, or we just take it off the market. This doesn't negate. Remember, you guys, I follow my clients' lawful instructions. So when commission rule says I have a duty to present all offers immediately, but no event later than three days, there are no exceptions. There are no, well, if they're gone for a week. So we just got to make arrangements before they go. Can you check in? Can you get to a public hotspot and check in with me once a day, right? I mean, we just got to talk to them several different options. The other thing to talk about with handling offers, and this is very so much true in this crazy world that we well, we still are in, this crazy world of multiple offers. Multiple offers means the seller's getting more than one offer on the property. A couple things about multiple offers. The fact that we have multiple offers is not a material fact. In other words, I don't have to disclose to other agents, to buyer's agents, whether or not I have multiple offers or not. They're going to call and ask, especially in this market that we're in right now, because multiple offers are so common. Other agents are going to call you, the listing agent, and ask, do you have other offers in your hand? There's no rule that says that they can't ask. The rule addresses how we respond. How we respond to that question is up to the seller. The seller decides if we are going to disclose that there's multiple offers or not. And again, it's a conversation with the seller. There's pluses and minuses to everything. So telling the seller telling you to disclose, the seller telling you to let people know there are multiple offers, they need to understand that some buyers, when they find out there are multiple offers, are going to turn around and run away. It's going to chase them off because they don't want that competition. On the other hand, there are other buyers that when they find out there are multiple offers, it's going to cause them to up their game. It's going to cause them to up their offer. So again, it just comes down to the seller. If your seller doesn't want to disclose, and that other agent calls you and asks if you have multiple offers, your honest answer is, my seller chooses not to disclose that. Don't lie. Don't say no when there are, yes when they're not. If your seller doesn't want to disclose, then you say, my seller doesn't choose to disclose that. We need to deliver the multiple offers that we have in our hand at the same time in no particular order. In other words, I cannot favor one offer over the other. If I have 5 in my hand, I can't look at my seller and give them the best offer first and hang on to the other 4 until they look at that one. Now I can advise them, I can give them all 5 and I can advise them and we can have a conversation what I think, but I can't favor one over the other. So we're not necessarily just giving them the most expensive or the best offer. We're giving them all and then discussing all of them at that time. What if one of those offers, the 5 in your hand, and one of them is from another agent in your firm? Can I favor that one over the other 4 from agents with different firms? Why not? The firm stands to make more money if we're in dual agency. Why can't I? Because the rule says I can't. Let's take that a step further. What if those 5 offers in your hand and one of them is your buyer? Can I just present, can I favor that offer and hang on to the other 4? Again, why not, you guys? You stand to make more money if you're the dual agent in this transaction. Always remember, it's not about you, is it? OCAR says it's about your seller client. So we have to present them all. They have to consider everything in our hand. I'll tell you one thing that came to be in this crazy multiple offer world that we're still kind of in, not like we used to be. But I actually like it a lot. And when listing agents were getting 45 offers on a property, for example, that's a little overwhelming for the most seasoned agent. That's a little intimidating. And one thing that a lot of agents were doing in this multiple offer world was like creating an Excel spreadsheet and listing the terms. Like, here's the terms of offer 1, purchase price, due diligence, earnest money, right? Here's all the terms of offer 1. Here's all the terms of offer 2. Here's all the terms of offer 3. So now we could sit down with the sellers and have the side-by-side comparison of the offers. I still have a duty to deliver the offers. I still have to send the offers to the seller, but at least by creating this Excel sheet, we could do this nice side-by-side comparison and help our sellers determine which one is the best. I had multiple as a listing agent. This was like in 2015, 2016. We were just starting to get into this multiple offer. Maybe it was a little later than that. Anyway, it was early in this crazy multiple offer. And I had 6 offers come in. And I'm here to tell you guys, all 6 of them were great. And a normal day, we would have accepted all 6 of them. There was nothing to counter. At that point for my sellers, it pretty much came down to, we'll take that one. It's pretty much what it boiled down to, because they were all good. The other thing about multiple offers is we can't shop offers. We can't pit the offerors together. When a buyer's agent calls the listing agent and says, what's the highest price offer you have in your hand? Again, there's no rule that says they can't call and ask. The rule says how we respond. So when a buyer's agent calls you and says, what's the highest offer you have in your hand? Commission rule says I cannot disclose the terms of the offer without the offeror's permission. Is any offeror in their right mind going to give you permission to disclose the terms of their offer? No, because you've just given somebody else the ability to shop offers, haven't you? You've just given them the ability to beat their offer. So again, you're going to get the call. It's going to happen. But what we need to know is how to respond. And we cannot share the terms of an offer without the offeror's permission. As a matter of fact, as far as that goes, I got a commission rule, 58A.0115. This is the rule that addresses disclosure of offers prohibited. And again, it's all the terms. It's not just about the purchase price. We know a little bit better now. It could be about who's offering the most due diligence, who's offering the most earnest money, right? Is anybody asking for seller paid closing costs? Does anybody want the seller to buy a home warranty? It's a matter of looking at all the terms, not just the purchase price. Talking a little bit more about our contract modifications, our counter offers. Like we said, a counter offer is a rejection. Any change is offering a rejection, possibly a counter offer. You cannot accept and make a change. If you're accepting, you're agreeing to all the terms, exactly how they are. If you're negotiating on paper with pen and you make enough changes, you strike through and write in the new term, and then everybody initials it and dates it. I don't have a lot of margin room on our sales contract to write a lot in to allow for these changes. So once you make enough changes, that form is going to become, you can't read it. So you want to make sure that you draft up a new offer with the newly agreed upon terms. Keep the old one, because the old one with all the changes show that meeting of the minds. They show the parties coming together and agreeing to this offer. And otherwise, what do we document? Everything. Don't throw stuff away. Keep it all. And when you are getting offers, whether they're rejected, accepted, countered, if you're in a multiple offer situation and you get 45 offers as the listing agent, we got to keep everything that came in. We got to retain everything, part of that document transaction. This was a big thing that got some agents in the crazy multiple offer world. You get 10 offers, we can only accept one, right? So the other 9 are rejected. Well, why do I have to keep them if they were rejected? And the reason why is because we document everything. Don't throw stuff away. So one will become a contract. All the other ones are just going to get tucked away. Furnishing copies of offer paperwork, contract paperwork, etc. Again, things are a little bit different now that we're in the e-world. It's so much easier to share documents. Bottom line, once we have offer paperwork, contract paperwork, we have a duty to deliver instruments within 3 days. So once they sign and you receive, we have a duty to make sure everybody, all parties who you are communicating with, get a copy of that contract. Buyers and buyers agents need a copy. Seller and sellers agents need a copy. As a buyer's agent, once you go under contract, mini celebration, once you go under contract, in addition to sending your buyer a copy of that contract, and the very next breath, one of the first things you need to do when you're officially under contract is send that signed contract to the lender so the lender can start their thing. No question, the longest part of the contract to closing process is getting loan approval. So get that contract to the lender as soon as you can, buyer's agent, so they can start. As soon as you send that to the lender, get it to the closing attorney so they can start their thing, and we can get settlement scheduled for the date in the contract that we're all shooting for. E-programs, dot loop, email, etc. allows us to share signed documents. But if your buyer doesn't have an email, if they don't trust e-programs, then we're going to go to the copier in the office. We're going to print them out some paper copies. Remember, they are the boss. So if they want paper, we say, you got it. Questions? All right, everybody put your pencil down for a second. We're gonna walk through a little exercise together. So it's gonna be yes, no stuff. You're gonna shake your head, yes or no. So let's walk through a couple scenarios together. And what we're gonna walk through, we're gonna make sure we're good with that magic moment in time and when it goes from being an offer to a contract. So let's look at this scenario. The buyer makes an offer with a purchase price of 150,000 with 250 in due diligence, 250 in earnest money, $1,500 in closing costs and a closing date in 3 months. They've asked the seller for the home warranty, and of course, they want that refrigerator. At this point in time, yes or no, are we under contract? No, we haven't really started, have we? All we've done is presented the offer. Buyer makes an offer to the seller. What are the seller's 3 choices? They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. This seller chooses to counter. They say, I don't want to pay any closing costs. You are not getting my refrigerator. I want to close in 6 weeks. All other terms are acceptable. So in other words, the seller is good with the purchase price, the due diligence, the earnest money. They said no to that, and the home warranty. So we've partially agreed on it, but I don't have full acceptance yet, do I? Seller says, I'm good with these terms, but I'm going to counter with these. So the seller counters. Yes or no? Are we under contract? No. Ball's now in the buyer's court now, right? They have 3 choices. They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. So no, we're not under contract yet. Buyer considers the terms of the seller's counter. They accept, which means what? The buyer accepts, which means they have signed the terms of the seller's counter, and the buyer tells their agent, the buyer tells the buyer's agent to go for it. Are we under contract? Look at you guys. I really can't trick you, can I? No, I got one step of it right. We got acceptance. Now the selling agent calls the listing agent and says, you have yourself a deal. My buyer's accepted. Are we under contract? Congratulations, because that communication has crossed the line. I must have those 2 things. The last offeree accepts it. The last offeror has communication of acceptance. Questions, comments? Okay. I got a question for you guys. Private chat. A, B, C, or D? And I'd like to hear from everybody, please. We all in? So let's see what we got. On Sunday, a listing agent receives a written offer for $145,000 on a house listed for $154,900. On Monday, the seller counters at $149,900 and gives the buyers 3 days to accept. On Wednesday, the buyer rejects that counter offer, and upon being informed, the seller says, okay, we'll accept the buyer's original offer. Under these circumstances, what do we have? Nothing. Because a counter offer is a rejection. A counter offer kills the original offer. Let me ask you guys this. If we can't go back, could the buyer or seller present a brand new offer with those original terms? Yes. So while we can't go back, we can present a new offer. Does that make sense? Once you kill it, it's dead. But you could, in this case, the seller could make a brand new offer to the buyer with those original terms. Please always remember that. A counter offer is a rejection. Nobody is bound. The roles reverse. The offeree now has 3 choices. I'm not going to name you, of course, but somebody just put some in the chat that, ding, 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 ding. You feel like you have a bad habit of thinking of the what if. Anybody else suffering the what if blues, the what if? Stop it. I promise you, the information that you need to know to answer this question is in the question. You don't got to think about that. I call it the what if trail. You may want to, if you remember Alice in Wonderland, she chases that bunny down the bunny hole. Don't follow that bunny down the bunny hole. Don't get sucked into the what if trail. If it's not in the problem, then it's not there. And that is a bad habit. And thank you for bringing that up, because I know you're not the only one. And we got to break that habit between now and the first week of March or so, don't we? So awareness is half the battle. If you're in the habit of reading things that aren't there, just stay focused on it. Has anybody ever been to Charleston or Savannah, one of those cities, or been anywhere that's offered like a carriage tour through the streets? Y'all know what I'm talking about? Y'all notice those horses and the carriage tours? Don't they have blinders up? What are those blinders doing? They're keeping them looking forward, right? They're preventing distractions from the sides. Now, I'm certainly not comparing you guys to horses, but the idea here is stay focused on what the question's asking. Keep your blinders up to keep that focus, because what's going on over here outside of your blinders is not going to help you get to the right answer of the test question. That's right. Somebody else just says you overthink it. It's so easy to do. But I promise you, the information that you need to answer this test question or any test question is in the problem. You don't have to create additional information to answer it. Fair enough? Thank you guys for sharing that. I think I asked you guys on day one, a lot of us, I look at some of you, and I know not necessarily all of us, but some of us, it's been a minute since we've been in a classroom, isn't it? It's been a minute since we've taken a test. The rest of you, we don't want to talk to you. But for the rest of us, that it's been a minute since we've been in a classroom, part of what we're doing is having to relearn how to study and take tests. And if anybody ever told you getting a real estate license is easy, they lied. I don't know another way to put that. Other questions or comments? So the last piece of Unit 10 is what we refer to as alternative land conveyance methods. Not everything sells in the traditional method that we've been discussing. So we got some alternative options. What we are going to see in this next section is a whole bunch of green stars, which means we just need a basic understanding on the rest of Unit 10. The highlight, the star of Unit 10 is the offer to purchase and contract. But with that being said, we do need to go through some of these alternative land conveyances. And the first alternative land conveyance we have is something called an installment land contract. With an installment land contract, the buyer is paying the seller the purchase price. The buyer is paying the seller the agreed upon purchase price, but they're not doing it in one lump sum. They are doing it in installments. They're making payments to the seller. The buyer is also known as the vendee, who's the receivee of the installment land contract. The seller is the vendor, the giver of the seller land contract. Here's the deal for the seller. With these types of situations, the seller is selling the property, but in a sense, they're also acting as the financing instrument, right? Instead of making payments to the bank, the buyer or the new owner is making payments to the seller until it's paid in full. The seller's gonna keep the deed until the last payment is made. The buyer's gonna get possession, they're gonna get permission to live there. They're gonna get something what's known as equitable title, which means they have the right to live there. But the seller keeps the deed. So if the buyer stops paying, if the buyer skips out in the middle of the night, the seller still has the deed. It's still the seller's property. When we get to financing next week, we're going to talk about something called seller financing. The difference in an installment land contract and seller financing is when the deed changes hands. Both situations, the buyer's making payments to the seller instead of the lender. Both situations, the buyer's making payments to the seller. In an installment land contract, the deed changes hands when the last payment's made. And seller financing, the deed changes hands at closing. So we'll revisit this. We look at an example real quick. Buyer agrees to purchase real property and to pay the seller the sum of $105,000 in the following manner. We've agreed we're going to do $5,000 at the execution of the contract, balance of $100,000, together with an interest rate of 12% until paid in full. Said principal and interest shall be payable in 240 installments of not less than $1,101.09 per month, beginning on the 18th day of March. So we laid out the terms, we lay out how much you're going to pay every month for the next 240 months. There's pluses and minuses to everything, right? So when it comes to an installment land contract, what are those pluses and minuses? Well, let's talk about the seller first. Some advantages to the sellers. They may have some tax benefits. They still own the property. They're still the owner of record. The deed is still in their name. So they may have some tax benefits. Tell them to call their attorney. This may make a hard to sell property more desirable. Maybe you have a buyer that's handy with a toolbox. So if there's a lot of work that needs to be done, maybe the two can make out some kind of arrangement for repairs, for example. The biggest advantage to the sellers that they keep the deed. They have the legal title. So in the event of the buyer's default, probably the biggest disadvantage to the seller, low down payment. But the biggest disadvantage to the seller is if they need all the money up front, they may not be able to do this. So it's up to the seller if they can take payments over 240 months, whatever we just saw. But that's the biggest disadvantage, is they're not going to get everything all at once. They're going to get it over a period of time. Pluses and minuses for the buyer. Well, this could be a good option if the buyer has poor credit. Maybe a lender won't give them loan approval, but the seller will take on the challenge. Maybe they'll agree to work with this buyer and give them this opportunity. Again, there may be some tax advantages to the buyer. They're the ones living there. They may even get to pay the property taxes. So we have both parties calling their attorney now. Not attorney, the other CYA. We have both parties calling their accountant. The biggest disadvantage to the buyer is in the event of their default. If the buyer defaults and stop paying, the seller can call the entire note due. They got to give them 30 days by law to come up with the entire note due. And if the buyer can't, they're out. And any money that they had previously paid stays with the seller. There's no reimbursement. And then other disadvantage is the buyer doesn't own the property yet, thus they can't use the property's collateral. They can't go down to the bank and try to borrow money on the property. We do not have a form. We do not have a pre-printed form for an installment land contract. So if and when this comes up in your real estate career, what do we have to do? Call that attorney. We do not have a pre-printed form. Listing agents. If your seller gets an offer from a buyer to do an installment land contract, do we have to present it to them? Do we have to? Yes, because what offers do we present? All of them. An offer to do an installment land contract is an offer. Questions on installment land contract? Another alternative method we have for conveying property is something called an option to purchase. This is our example of a unilateral contract. How many sides have to perform in a unilateral contract? How many sides? Just one. Everything else we do is a bilateral, which means there's two sides. And an option, we're only looking at a unilateral. Claudia, I'll get that in just 1 second. Sorry about that. With an option to purchase, unilateral contract, the buyer has not promised to buy. The buyer has asked for the option to buy. They've asked the seller to give them time to decide if they want to buy or not. There's no promise made on the buyer yet. So the way these things work, we agree on all the terms, like we go under contract like normal. And what the option to purchase says is, if I decide to buy at the end of this option period, these are the terms that I'm going to buy at. This is the purchase price, down payments, closing dates, So we're agreeing to the terms if the buyer decides to buy. So they've asked for this option. They have a period of time to decide. At the end of the option period, they either buy, in which case now we enter into a bilateral contract, or we don't. They don't. Another thing that makes an option to purchase unique is there's more than one form of consideration. Remember, consideration is just something of value. So in addition to the agreed upon sales price, we're also going to have, more often than not, a very healthy option fee. Here's the deal: unilateral contract, only one party has to perform, right? The buyer's not under any obligation. The party that has to perform, or in this case, not perform, is the seller. And the promise made by the seller is that I won't sell my home to anybody else during this option period. The seller can't sell it from out from underneath the buyer while they're exploring their option. What in the world would make a seller agree to something like this? There's usually a pretty healthy option fee. If the buyer doesn't buy, the seller keeps the option fee. If they do, it's going to be credited back to them at closing. Sounds kind of like due diligence a little bit, doesn't it? The difference is with due diligence, they're contractually obligated. With the option to purchase, they've just asked to explore the option. Again, at the end of the option period, they'll either buy or they won't. Once again, no pre-printed form for these. So what are we going to do? Call our attorney. If you're a listing agent and you get an offer from a buyer to do an option to purchase, do you have to present that to your seller? Yes, because we present what offers? All of them. By the way, to protect the buyer from the shady seller, what's going to prevent the seller from selling this out from underneath the buyer? Remember, we got an attorney involved. And when it comes to options, both statute of frauds and Connor Act apply. So the attorney is going to make sure this thing's in writing and signed so it's enforceable. They're going to make sure that this thing is recorded. The Connor Act is what's going to prevent the shady seller from selling it out from underneath the buyer. They're going to record this option. Questions on this one? So we got a question as I was flipping on the installment land contract, and the question is it a rent to own? Is the installment land contract a rent to own? And the answer is no. Because if a rent to own, you may be renting the property to live to eventually own it. But with an installment land contract, it's just a different agreement. It's very similar. And I totally get where those can get crossed, but keep those separated because they could be a couple different things. So the installment land contract, you're just making payments. Very similar to a rent to own, but there seems to be more legalities with the installment land contract. So installment land contract, option to purchase, and another form of alternative conveyance that we have. Before we talk about that, let's first talk about something called a preemptive right. A preemptive right is a contractual right to acquire property. Maybe I don't want to sell yet, but when I do decide to sell, you want to be first in line to buy it. Maybe I don't want to buy it just yet, but if I ever decide to buy it, if you ever decide to sell it, a preemptive right will put you first in line. Preemptive rights, again, are these contractual agreements that says you have to go to the contracting party first. And we have two different types of preemptive rights. The first one is the right of first refusal. With the right of first refusal, the owner promises the contracting party that if ever in the future they do decide to sell, and no, excuse me, if it ever in the future they receive an offer, the right of first refusal says that the seller has to take that offer to the buyer and give them the opportunity to match it. Maybe you don't want to buy the corner lot next door, but maybe you don't want Dollar General to buy it either. So you could enter into a right of first refusal with that owner of the corner lot next door, that if they ever go to sell it before they can accept that offer, they're contractually obligated to come to you first and give you the first opportunity to purchase. It's not a promise to sell. It just says, if I ever decide to sell at a future date, I have to come to you to give you that opportunity to match that offer. These may be common with tenants. Some tenants that have been there for 12 years, 15 years, may like the home, may not want to leave. And they may say, look, I know you don't want to sell now, but if you ever do decide to sell, I'm going to get this right of first refusal. I'm going to get this opportunity to match that offer. Do you guys know another good example? Whoa. What was that? Sorry about that. Do you guys know my Winston-Salem people? You're familiar with Old Salem? Y'all know people live in Old Salem? Those houses there, they're occupied. Seller lives there, right? So Old Salem, excuse me, has a right of first refusal. Old Salem Inc. has a right of first refusal that says, before you sell, you got to bring it to us first. What if the seller doesn't like either offer? They receive an offer. They have three choices. What are their choices? They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. So if your seller goes, what the heck is an option? I don't like the idea of this. Do they have to accept it? No, my job is to present it for them to make that decision. The other preemptive right that we have is the right of first opportunity to purchase. If a seller decides to sell later, they've got to go to that contracting party first. We've already decided on the price. I don't want to sell today, but if I ever decide to sell my house, I'm going to come to you first and give you the opportunity to buy my property for X amount. We're going to agree to the date or the amount. We're going to do a nice little side-by-side comparison on these two in just a second, so we can really see the big difference between the two, understanding they're similar because they are both preemptive rights. No pre-printed forms for preemptive rights. Call the attorney. Do I have to present the offer to do a preemptive right? Yep, because we present which offers? All of them. It's just easy that way, isn't it? You don't have to play the game of, should I present this? The answer is yes. It's always going to be yes, because we present all offers. Seller has three choices: accept it, reject it, or counter it. So with our preemptive rights, guys, the big difference in the two, the right of first refusal, you got to match the bona fide offer. Right of first opportunity to purchase, there is no offer to match. What this says is if the seller decides to sell, you're first in line. They're contractually obligated to come to you first. Again, green stars. Please look it over. Do not spend all your study time on this. We're talking about one or two, maybe two test questions. So don't get bogged down. Look it over, be familiar with it. So you can get those test questions, but don't spend all Saturday afternoon on alternative land conveyances. Fair enough? And that wraps up Unit 10. There's those key terms. On page 269, again, I'm a very firm believer. It all starts with knowing what the word means. If you don't know what the word means, how can you answer a test question on it? So make sure, don't forget you have a glossary in the back of your book. You can look words up there. If you come across a word you don't find in the glossary, you have a very handy dandy tool at your disposal. It's called Google. If you don't know what a word means, look it up. Key point review. It's on page 302. And then your student quiz starts on page 304. Everybody want to take a big exhale with me? Remember what I've been babbling on about. Units 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested units. You guys have figured out by now, I'm kind of a math nerd, self-proclaimed. I sat down with your test one day and I figured out how many questions came from 7, 8, 9, and 10. You know what I came up with? About 40% of your exam is from units 7, 8, 9, and 10. Those 4 units are not alone to pass you, but that's a big chunk, you guys. We move on. I need you to keep going back and reviewing and studying agency and contracts. By the way, one thing we haven't really discussed much, we've talked about post-licensing. You have 3 30-hour classes to do once you get your license. One thing I haven't mentioned much are the post-licensing class topics. One of them is called Brokerage Relationships and Responsibilities, which is a fancy way of saying agency. So you're going to take 7 and 8 in post-licensing and spend 30 more hours on it. Another one is Contracts and Closings. Units 9 and 10 and 21 when we get there. We're going to spend 30 more hours on 9, 10, and 21. The third one is North Carolina Law and Rule. So your license law and commission rule are going to come back up in post-licensing for 30 more hours. What do you think the 3 heavily tested sections of pre-licensing are? Agency, contracts, and license law and commission rule. What questions do I have? Okay, let's take 10. Got more good stuff to talk about when we get back. Are we back? So we got a few things to talk about tonight, the rest of the evening, off book. You ready to get off book and off PowerPoint for a minute? Just 1 minute. Okay. So still important stuff. I need you guys here. It still counts as class time. I did not just say you have an excuse to leave early, because again, we have important stuff. So let me first, cameras are coming on. Let me first take attendance. And the first thing that we need to discuss, and I'm going to stop sharing so we can have a good eyeball to eyeball conversation. The first thing that we need to discuss is your midterm. Remember we said on the first day, you guys will have a midterm when we get halfway. Well, guess what? I consider unit 10 the halfway point. So guess what? The good news and the bad news. Good news is we've been through half of the material. Not so great news, we still got half to go. So we won't stop. We'll keep going next week. However, it's a good opportunity for you to stop and gauge yourself. The midterm is required. I'm not looking for pass or fail. I'm looking to see that you attempted it. I'm looking to see that you tried. Everybody with me so far? I cannot make you take this seriously. I don't know why you wouldn't. Honestly, the midterm is not for me. The midterm is for you guys to see how you're doing thus far. And I need you to stop and ask yourself, if I were sitting down today to take the final exam, would I pass or not? We're going to use it as a gauge. This is how we're going to handle this. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to send you guys an email with a link. That link will be to your midterm, and you will have an entire week to take it. I'm giving you 1 week to take a 2-hour midterm test. So whenever you're available, whenever you have that opportunity to sit down, this is a one-time link, which means you can't take it over and over and over again. A one-time link, which means you start it, you need to be prepared to stop it. If we're treating this like a real test, we're sitting in a distraction-free zone, and you're allowing 2 hours to take this test. Once you complete the midterm, you and I will both get an email. We, as true to your final exam and your state exam, we are not going to go over or review specific questions. My end of class exam and the state exam, you are prohibited from discussing the details of the exam. And if we're treating the midterm like this, then we're not going to see specific questions. However, the report you get when you finish is going to give you something even more valuable. And that report is going to give you your score on the different topics. So it's going to tell you how you scored on the agency questions. How did you score on the contract questions? How did you score on land use control questions? And when you look at your report, if you bombed agency, what does that tell you? We need to go back and review it, right? Guys, here's the deal. The questions you see on the midterm, you're never going to see again. So it's not a matter of going over those specific questions. It's a matter of going over the topics that you're not doing well, the topics that you're not doing as proficient with. Does that make sense? So tomorrow morning, you can look out for an email from me. I don't know exactly what time, but I do know this. I have an appointment late morning and I got to leave the house by 11. So you guys will have that email from me by 11. If you're sitting down to eat lunch tomorrow and you don't have the email from me for whatever reason, please reach out to me. Okay, so be on the lookout for it tomorrow. If you don't get it for whatever reason, just reach out to me and say, Julie, I didn't get it. Check your spam too. Because sometimes I wind up in your spam. I don't know why. So be on the lookout for that. The link is open. It's available for 1 week. Can everybody give me 2 hours in 1 week? Perfect. We're treating this like a real test. Y'all, For some of you, you're going to see this as a, wow, I'm right on track and I'm doing well. Others of you may see this as a wake-up call. Let's think of this as an opportunity to see where we are right now. If you take it seriously, if you treat it like a real test, if you go into this saying, if I were taking the final exam today, how would I do? Questions on the midterm?
I'm sorry, how many questions did you say is on the midterm?
I didn't, and I think, please don't hold me to this, but I think there are 55. No math on the midterm. No math. We know we're reviewing math. We've done math in units 3, 4, and 8 so far. I think there are 55. That's the number that's coming to my mind. You guys may be able to tell me differently once you take it. And you do get 2 hours. Question comes in, can you take it more than once? Nope, it's a one-time link. So once you click on that link, I need you to be sitting there for 2 hours to take that test. Does that make sense? You can't go back to it. So once you start it, and that's why I need you guys to have that time dedicated, to have that distraction-free, put your do not disturb sign up so your family knows to leave you alone for a couple hours. Yes, ma'am, Tessa?
When is the midterm opening? I don't know if you said it and I just missed it or.
Tomorrow morning. So yep, it opens tomorrow morning. I'll send you the link tomorrow morning, and I think it goes through, what's tomorrow? Friday. So it would go through next Thursday. This gives you time if you want to take the weekend. If you want to take the weekend and knock out the midterm, you can. If you want to take the weekend and study, go back and review units. Y'all don't worry about unit 1. There you go. How about that? So go back and review units 2 through 10 and 20. Yep, 2 through 10 and 20. Remember, 20 is our super scary environmental unit. Don't worry about 1. So 2 through 10 and 20. I'm telling you, the report is the most valuable thing. By the way, your midterm and also your end of class exam is delivered in a platform called Classmarker. And when we look in the email from Lane that we use to access the class, the email from Lane that we click on the Zoom link every time we come to class, when we look in this email, we're going to see that we have a little tutorial on Classmarker. So this is a couple-minute video that Jane did for you guys, and it walks you through what Classmarker looks like. I encourage you to look at this before you sit down to do the midterm. Another benefit of doing the midterm is, again, this is the same platform that we're going to do our final exam on. So this will give you experience and exposure, and we can take that part out of test day. So it'll give you practice with it before you have to take your test. The tutorial will show you how to work it. You can bookmark questions, you can skip questions, you can go back to them, and that's what the tutorial is showing to you. So I do recommend you take a few minutes to watch the tutorial before you take the midterm. We're going to talk about our final exam. The end of class exam is the very last thing that we talk about. We'll go over the rules and expectations for my exam at the very end. I'm not going to do it now because, quite frankly, you guys aren't going to remember between now and then, and I don't really have time to do it twice. So we're going to wait and talk about my final exam, rules and expectations, is the very last thing that we do on March 1st, knowing our exam is on March 2nd. Last day of class is the final exam. So just about the last words you will hear me say is on March 1st with the rules and expectations of my exam. But it's a good start to make sure we're all on the same page. We're familiar with ClassMarker. We've been exposed to it, and we know how that works. What else on the midterm? Everybody clear? I need a thumbs up from everybody that you acknowledge that this is a requirement. Failure to attempt the midterm means you are not eligible for the end of class exam. Again, I'm not looking for pass or fail. I'm looking to see that you tried. But good on the midterm? Anything else on the midterm? The other thing I want to talk about tonight, again, since we are halfway-ish there, we are at a point where we need to talk about how the discussion about how, when you're ready, you can submit your application to the Real Estate Commission, how you can apply to take your state exam, the kind of yay, I passed Julie's class. Now what? And that's what's covered in this booklet. The one you have in the online learning system, y'all, the Real Estate Commission just sent an updated one. We just got this today. So we haven't had a chance yet. I mean, it is hot off the presses, right? So we haven't had a chance yet to put it on the online learning system. I know it is in Jane's to-do list, but right now the one you have in the online learning system is a little old. It's last month, but remember, we're always going to make sure that we're looking at the new. So at some point tomorrow, I'm sure Jane will load this into the again, this is in the welcome section and the online learning system. So just make sure when you see this, you see the February 2023 date. And I'll tell you guys in just a minute what the change was. It's actually a good change. So no, it's not updated monthly, just whenever they have major changes or updates. And again, this was a good change, and I'll tell you in just a second. So this is the booklet. This is from the Real Estate Commission. And this is the booklet that says, I am ready to apply for my license. What do I do? How do I fill out my application? Where do I go? All that good stuff. You guys got this in the email from Lane when you first registered for the class. I believe she asked you guys to look it over. There's more stuff in here other than how to get your license. So it's jam-packed full of good stuff. We're just going to focus on that process right now. I know some of you are more ready to go than others. So some of you may want to start your application process, understanding you can't complete the application until you get the certificate of completion from Lane. So you cannot submit your application to the commission until you pass the pre-licensing course and get that certificate of completion. So I just want to go through, you guys need to look through this because again, there's some good stuff, but we're just going to pull out a couple highlights. And the big thing that we want to look at first is on page 7. And 7 is the application process. And I need you guys to understand that this is a process. And you got to do things in a certain order. And that's what this does. It gives you that order. You all are currently in the throes of step 1. You are in the process of completing the pre-licensing course. So step 1 is in progress. Once you pass the test and Lane sends you your certificate of completion, you can submit your application along with the certificate. I'll show you in just a minute where you start and do your application. Once the Real Estate Commission gets your application, they're going to review it. They're going to look it over. When they determine that you're a candidate for a real estate license, then they're going to send you what's known as a notice of exam eligibility. You cannot go to the testing center. You cannot contact the testing center until you have this notice of exam eligibility from the Real Estate Commission. So step 1 is to pass pre-licensing. Step 2 is to submit your application. Step 3 is to get your notice of exam eligibility. And then you can apply to the testing center. The testing center is PSI Testing Center. There are locations all over the state. I know Winston, Charlotte, Raleigh, Fayetteville, Asheville, probably one in Wilmington. So there are testing centers all over. This was the change that was made. You used to be able to do your state exam online at home. And effective yesterday, they said, no, we're going to do away with that. You've got to go to an in-person testing center. The reason being, you guys, the online was not good. Students were getting logged out, timed out, but they're logged out of the exam, kicked out, but their clock was still running and they were losing that time. And if you don't finish it in time, you lose that. It was a mess. It was bad. Trust me, it's a good thing. They just didn't have it together yet. I hate to say that, but they just didn't have it together yet. So effective yesterday, the Real Estate Commission has taken that back. And now the only option that you have is to contact PSI Testing Center to schedule an in-person exam once you get that notice of exam eligibility. So the process, again, is on, this says 7 in your booklet, step by step. Again, I'll show you in just a second. Every single time you go to PSI Testing Center, it's $156. Remember, we said your exam, there's 2 sections. There's a national section and a state section. You have to pass both sections to get your license. Here's the good news. If you go to PSI and you pass one section and you fail the other, when you go back, you only have to retake the section that you failed. So when you go back, you don't have to retake both sections, just the one. However, every time you go to PSI Testing Center, it's going to cost you $156. You guys want to be ready when you go? Do you want to be prepared? That's money out of your pocket, you guys. So I highly encourage you to be ready. Let's see, the booklet, again, we're going to look in just a second about where to apply online. I'll show you that. Here's some information that they're going to gather from you for your application. When we see the where to apply online button, there's no reason all of you, whether you're ready or not, can't start the application process, because you can always save it and go back to it, right? So if you start it tonight, you can save it and go back. But I do recommend that you guys go ahead and at least start it, because I know, for example, they want, like, I think it's your last 7 years of addresses, something like that. So it's good that you start the process now, start clicking on it so you can start gathering that information, knowing that you can't submit it until you're done with this class, but you could start it tonight if you want to. You can always save your work. One thing that's going to be a part of your application is they're going to do a background check. They're going to require you to submit a background check, a criminal background check. Where you order the criminal report is within the online application, so you don't have to go to a separate place. It's all within the online application. Your background check is only good for 6 months. So you may want to wait until closer to the end of February to order that. Does that make sense? Because if you order it today, you're pretty much wasting a month. So if you wait until closer to our exam, then you know you have that 6 months. If you don't pass both sections within 6 months, you got to order another background check. How much these things cost depends. If you have only lived in North Carolina for the last 7 years, you're going to get it. I don't know if it gives you a cost or not. I don't think it does. If you've only lived in North Carolina for the last 7 years, you're going to get it back quickly. I don't know how much it is. If you've lived in other states for the last 7 years, if you've lived in another country for the last 7 years, you can expect more time and more money. All states are different and how long it takes back to them. And I mean, they even call out New York. Do I have any former New Yorkers on here? They say New York is known for taking their sweet old precious time. So all states are different, costs are different. I cannot tell you guys how much, because I don't even know the cost of North Carolina, not alone the cost of the specific states. But again, you can click on buttons now. You don't have to order anything just yet, but you can click on buttons in the application and start seeing what all you're going to have to gather and what all you're going to have to do. Sometimes students get nervous when I say you're going to pull a background check. If you have a blemish in your past, that doesn't mean you're going to get denied a license. If you have a blemish in your past, they're going to consider it. They're going to see if you have good character. Have you served your debt to society, right? They're going to take all of that into consideration. So if you have some kind of blemish, it's not an automatic out, but they do talk about what they're looking for with character issues. If you have a blemish, you could consider looking at this procedures with applicants with character issues. You can do what's called here it is, petition for predetermination. So in other words, if you have a background, a criminal background, you can ask the commission to consider that, just look at that and see if that, based on that alone, they will give you a license. Y'all don't call Lane and I and tell us what you did and ask if you're going to get a license. Let me just go ahead and nip that in the bud right now. Lane and I are not the commission. We are not the ones that make the decision. That's just you sharing too much information. And our answer is, I don't know. You got to get to the commission. Man, I've heard some things. So yeah, let me go ahead and squash that now. So criminal background check. Here's some information on the licensing exam. Again, it breaks it down into two sections. There's a national section and a state section. Here's your PSI testing center. Once you submit your application is good for 180 days. Within that 180 days, you got to pass both sections. If you fail, you can go back. I think they make you wait 10 days in between, but you can go back as many times as you need to until you pass both sections. If at the end of 180 days, you haven't passed both sections, you got to start with the application process again. So you got to go back and resubmit another application. You got to start all over, pass both sections again, and you'll have to do another background check. You do not have to take retake pre-licensing. Your certificate of completion that you get from Lane is good for 3 years. And that certificate of completion says you can do as many applications within 180 days as you can within that 3 years. So you don't have to retake pre-licensing until it's been 3 years. Y'all do not wait 3 years to take your state exam, because things change, things update, and you're always going to be tested on the current material. I'm telling you guys, if we finish class in March, you put the book down for 1.5 years, and then decide you want to go get your license and you pick it up for the first time, do you know how much you're going to remember from our class a year and a half later? It just kind of all goes away if you don't use it, right? So when we finish in March and you get that certificate of completion, you all have to keep going. You all have to keep studying. Remember, when we are done, you are not. You've got to keep going and keep up with those study habits. I'm telling you, I get calls on the regular from former students. Do you remember me? I was in your class 2 years ago and now I'm ready to take the state exam. What do I do? Say, well, here's my current YouTube channel. Start on day one. You know, I mean, that's pretty much it. So please don't wait 3 years, of course, unless you have to. But you don't have to, again, 180 days, you just got to restart with the application process. You don't have to come back and take pre-licensing unless it's been over 3 years. They kind of give you a basic format. Look, here's a couple practice questions for you as well. Isn't that nice? So they kind of give you a basic format of what to expect, how it's going to look. Then we have our exam content outline. Probably one of the more common questions I get after the exam is, what do I study? Well, here it is. These are the topics of the syllabus. This is the breakdown of the number of questions that you could expect to see in each topic. So for example, I don't want you guys spending a lot of time on insurance, which is unit 13, construction, which is 16, investment, which is 18. This is unit 1. So of these whole 4 units, you can only expect to see 3 questions. However, look at agency. Now you can expect to see 22 questions. Agency contracts, now you're looking at 15. So you can use this to help you gauge your weight, so you can know where to focus your study time. Here's financing, which is where we're going next week. You can expect to see 12 questions on that. Math, all the time. How many math questions am I going to see on my state exam? You're going to see 8. So it gives you a nice breakdown. You can use this as your guide to help you focus your study attention. Your national section, there's 80 questions. Your state section, there's 40. You also have what I call test the test questions. So you're going to have a couple questions that don't count for or against you. You're going to never know if it's a real question or not. But what you're doing is vetting test questions for future test takers. Do you know what previous test takers did for you guys? They vetted these test questions. So in other words, before they release them as an official question, they do a pre-test. They vet the questions and do a test the test. So they won't count for or against you. You'll be none the wiser. You got to get 57 out of 80 to pass the national section, 29 out of 40 to pass the state. Each section is timed, which we're going to see in just a second. I may have gotten ahead of myself. I'm sorry. I'll go back. Maybe. I got ahead of myself. Stick to the schedule, Julie. Okay. We'll talk about the time in just a second. I thought it was right here. Again, they just updated this thing. So you and I are seeing this for the first time today, hot off the presses. Applying for and scheduling an exam. Again, that notice of exam eligibility from the Real Estate Commission. Do not call PSI Testing Center until you have that notice of exam eligibility. Let's call this your golden ticket. You cannot go to PSI until you get that golden ticket from the commission. The commission won't give you that until they approve your application. You can't submit your application until you finish this class. It's a process, and everything has to happen in the right order. So this walks you through, once you get that notice of exam eligibility, what you need to do when you contact PSI Testing Center. It's all in here. There's your 180 days. There's your $156 again, every time you go. You can schedule your exam either online or pick up the phone and call them. There's their website if you want to start seeing where their location. Oh, here they are. Asheville, Charlotte, Fayetteville, Greenville, Raleigh, Wilmington, and Winston. So those are the testing center, the office or the testing locations. And understand this is a testing center. So there's going to be candidates taking the real estate exam, but there also may be candidates taking like the nursing exam or the CPA exam, right? They got several different things going on in there. The testing center. Here's a step-by-step on scheduling online. They give you screenshots and a little tutorial. Going to exam, they're going to need, and they'll send you an email once you schedule as well. But here it is. If you want to look at it, you're going to need certain forms of identification. When you first get to PSI Testing Center, they're going to offer you a tutorial. The tutorial does not count against your time. Your clock doesn't start with the tutorial. So I do recommend you guys take the 15 minutes to watch the tutorial so you know how their online exam works. So you can have that, again, have that exposure, be familiar with that before you actually start. If you don't pass one section or both and you need to reschedule, special accommodations for candidates with disabilities. If you have, for example, a documented disability, PSI Testing Center will work with you for those accommodations. So you just need to communicate with them, what they need to know and what they need, or how you communicate with that. It's here. Here's your test arrival check-in procedures. They're not patting y'all down yet, but it's pretty dang secure. If you go in anything with your pockets, purses, anything like that, I think some testing centers give you a little locker to put your stuff in, right? So they're going to have you be empty your pockets. Acceptable forms of identification. Security. Y'all want to know the number one problem the commission has with the state exam? Number one problem, hands down, across the state. Cheating. Cheating. How do you think the commission feels about handing you a license if they find you cheating on your exam? Is that a good representative that they want running around? No, I don't know a faster way for you to get denial than by trying to cheat. Come on, y'all. All the effort you put into cheating, take that energy, pick the book up and learn the material so you can pass without cheating. Blows my mind. We have to talk about this with adults. Don't cheat. Here's our time. So you get 2.5 hours with the national section and 1.5 with the state. Here's the deal. Once the clock starts for each section, it doesn't stop. So if you need to take a break in the middle of your national section, the clock keeps going. However, you do get a break in between sections. And it is recommended that you plan your break then, once you finish the national and before you begin the state. And I do think you guys should take a break because let's face it, we all need a break, right? So I do suggest, but just know if you get up 30 minutes into your national section, that clock keeps ticking. So just be aware of that. We want to make sure you're utilizing your time. When you pass, not if, when you pass, PSI is not giving you a real estate license. When you pass, they will submit your score to the commission. The commission will then mail you your real estate license. They actually mail you a license. I suggest you run out to Hobby Lobby and get you a nice frame. Y'all see this? You worked hard for this. I'm very proud of mine because you know what? I worked hard for this thing. So they'll mail you a nice 8.5 by 11 license. Go get you a document frame. You deserve it. Excused absences, inclement weather, blah, blah, blah. The last piece of this, again, we're looking through it. We're going to talk about provisional broker status when we get to licensed law and commission rule. We're going to talk about active, inactive. We're going to license renewal. We're talking about this stuff. So looking at this booklet is not only useful to get you ready for your state exam, but it's all stuff that's coming up at the end of our class as well. So I suggest you look through it. Post licensing and CE, that's covered in here. Again, I know I went through it fast. It's not in the online learning system yet, but it will be. I bet you Jane will have it in there tomorrow for you guys. So just make sure you're seeing February 2023. So where do we start the application process? It all starts at ncrec.gov. Real Estate, North Carolina Real Estate Commission, ncrec.gov. And from the home page, if we scroll down to the very bottom, we see a button that says, apply for a license. It all starts here. There is no reason why you guys can't all click on this button now. Again, and start gathering what they're knowing what they're gathering for, knowing what they're looking for. And then once you get that certificate of completion from Lane, you'll be ready to finalize and submit. Again, you cannot submit your application until you get that certificate from Lane once you pass this class. Do not try to put your cart in front of your horse. It just won't work. And then you call Lane frustrated because the application system doesn't work. Lane says, well, no, because you haven't gotten your certificate of completion yet. It is a process and it's got to happen in the order that it is spelled out. I see questions about my end exam, my end of class exam. I need to focus right now just on the state exam. So let me ask you guys, what questions do we have just on your state exam? Just on your state exam. Another good thing about them doing away with the online learning, guys, it was tough. It was tough. And I had students, anybody in the habit of talking yourself through questions, maybe not out loud, but at least moving your mouth when you read. Yeah, you got one warning online. And if they caught you doing it again, exam's gone. It was tough. There are a lot of kinks to work out. There are a lot of things that weren't great. Instructors across the state were thrilled that they did away with it. Now, when you go to the testing center, you're sitting in a big room with a bunch of people, so you still can't talk out loud. You still can't have a full-blown conversation with yourself, but at least you can move your mouth, right? At least you can read out loud to yourself now because you're in person. They'll provide you scratch paper. I'll let you use scratch paper. Again, we'll talk about that. I don't know if they provide you with a calculator. My suggestion is you take your calculator. Worst case scenario, they make you put it in your little locker. So either they'll provide you with one or you have one. But again, I would hate for you guys to be stuck without a calculator. So has everybody been basic calculator shopping? Yep. Okay, good. If you haven't, please go. I can't let you take my test with everything that basic calculator. Anything? Question comes in, do you find out if you pass the same day? You find out if you passed that moment. You finish the exam. Mine too, you guys. You finish the exam. You hit submit. It says, are you sure? You say yes. And boom, there it is right in front of you, pass or fail. Mine too. So you don't have to wait. I do not mind sharing with you guys. The first time I went to the state exam, I failed. It's tough. It's hard. I got cocky. I got full of myself and I failed the first time. And that was a bad day. Ran out in the parking lot and called mom, you know, and then what we do when we're upset. I called mom and, you know, and mom said, we know, mom, maybe you did better than you think you did. I already know. It was a bad day, but you know what I did the next day? I picked myself off. I dusted myself up and I tried it again. It's not uncommon. I'm not going to lie. It's not uncommon. I got top producing agents that have had to take this exam. I got top producing agents that have had to take this class numerous times. These tests are in no way any kind of indication of what kind of real estate agent you're going to be. These tests are just proven to the Real Estate Commission that you have the minimum competency for them to justify handing you a license. Does it give you a score what you missed? I don't remember if it gives you a score or if it gives you a pass fail. Y'all got to remember, I took mine in 2008. That was a long time ago. So I don't remember, but I do know it gives you a breakdown. It gives you a report and tells you the percentage that you got of agency and contracts and financing, all that good stuff. So it does give you a breakdown, similar to what you guys are going to see in the midterm and my end of class exam. How many days did you say you have to wait to retake? I think it's 10. So if you fail a section, you can schedule it that day, right? But I think they make you wait 10 days. And that's good because that gives you time to look at your report and know what you need to go back and study. What else on our state exam? Again, you cannot submit your application right now, but there's no reason why you can't click on this button and wait. If you're ready to go, if you're feeling good and you're feeling confident, wait until the end of the month to order your background check. So you have that back. Submit your application when you get your certificate of completion from Lane. Question on my exam. Our test is 4 hours. So the last day of class will go 5:30 and you have the option to go until 9:30. So ours is 4 hours as well.
So that day we'll just log into the place that we're taking the test.
No,
Instead
on
of-
test day, we'll log on to Zoom like we always do.
Mhm.
Because I got to do a little one-on-one check-in with you guys to check your space. And then I will give you the link for the exam. We'll all start at the same time.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yep, but I got to do a little one-on-one. By the way, that's a good point, Claudia. Thank you. Again, we're talking about my exam. The last thing we talk about is my exam. But one thing I need you guys to be working on now with my exam, I need you in a distraction-free zone. I cannot have you having conversations with other people in the room. How do I know if you're talking about the weather or if you're talking about the test? So I can't have anybody in the room with you. I can't see you having a conversation. I can't have you with anybody. So start now securing a distraction-free zone. Do you need to go to a friend's house to get away from the kids? Do you need to, what do you need to do? But for my test, 0 distractions. The Real Estate Commission says if I suspect you of cheating, I'm supposed to remove your exam right there on the spot. We'll talk about it later. Please don't give me a reason to do that. I'll also have somebody helping me that night, proctor. So there'll be 2 sets of eyes on you guys, not just me. We will talk about my exam, the rest about my exam at the end. All right, I got one more thing to say. Anything else on the state exam? Everybody good? Booklet, all the information you need is there. Is there an option to take my exam in person? I don't know. I don't think so. If you need, special accommodations or anything, reach out to Lane. And if you need special accommodations, reach out to Lane. Please do so sooner rather than later, so she can make arrangements for those special accommodations. You need a documented disability. You can learn more about that in the special accommodations in the book that we just looked at. Please don't wait the day before the test. That doesn't give Lane time to make arrangements. So we'll do our test on Zoom though. Okay, midterm link coming tomorrow. Midterm is open tomorrow. You get a week. Next week, we move on. We keep going forward. So next week, we get into financing. Next week, we get into units 14 and 15. Test candidates tend to struggle with the financing. So I'm trying to give you the heads up. I'm trying to give you the warning now, so you guys can look ahead. There are two reasons why I think we tend to struggle with financing. First off, with financing comes math. Doesn't that make sense? So we're going to see heavy math in the next week or so. You got the math concepts at the end of 14 and 15. If you want to look ahead, get a head start of it. The other reason why I think we struggle with financing is because to get through these units, we need to almost pretend that we're not in real estate school anymore. And we need to think like a broker. And I know this is odd because you guys signed up for it thinking you're going to be in real estate. We're not in mortgage lending school. We're not taking a test, but we do need a very basic understanding on how the financing works. It's a whole new vocabulary. It's a whole new language. We're taking a break from broker, and next week we're going to start speaking mortgage lender. So I really encourage you guys to look ahead at that math, understand what's coming. We will start that. We're going to Kahoot, by the way, to a good review of units 9 and 10. So we will Kahoot, and then we jump right into financing, and onward we go. Guys, please remember, as you're studying this weekend, as you're getting ready for your midterm, I'm always here to help. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. If you're stuck on a question on your computer, take a screenshot and send it to me. If you have a question in your book, take a picture and send it to me. I do well with pictures. I can help you get unstuck, but I don't know what you're stuck on if you don't reach out to me. Let me help. Remember, I too am a tool. I too am a resource. So let me help get you unstuck. Nothing hurts me more than on test day when you guys show up and say, I never really understood that. Anyway, guess what? Test day, it's too late. What else? Okay. You get 6 extra minutes to go study for that midterm. Sound good? Sound good. Y'all have a great weekend. We'll see you guys on Tuesday. I look forward to seeing your midterm results starting tomorrow.